Hey there, how are you doing today? No, really, how are you? Take a second and sit with that question. You might be listening to this podcast while walking alone, sitting by a window, maybe lying in bed with a tired heart. I want to start with something we don't hear enough. It's okay to feel lonely sometimes. You're not weak, strange, or broken for craving connection. But what if I told you that being alone doesn't have to mean feeling lonely? What if I told you that solitude could become your superpower, your sanctuary, not your punishment? Because the truth is, learning to be alone, without feeling alone, can be one of the most powerful things you ever do for yourself.
Yes, let me tell you about someone named Adam. He was always surrounded by people, texting, posting, always in a group chat. But the moment he was alone, the silence felt like a storm. So he filled every space with noise, Netflix, social media, loud music. One night, his phone died while he was out on a late walk. No distractions. Just him and the sound of his own thoughts. And he panicked. That's when he realized he didn't actually know himself. Because we often confuse loneliness with emptiness, when sometimes it's just unfamiliarity with our own company. And that's the journey we're on today, turning solitude into something sacred, not scary.
Loneliness isn't just about being physically alone. You can feel lonely in a crowd. You can feel disconnected in a relationship. You can feel isolated even while holding someone's hand. Loneliness is when we're not seen, not heard, not known. So the first step isn't to rush into filling that space with someone else, but to sit with it, to understand it, to ask, what part of me is hungry for connection right now? Because when you identify the root, whether it's boredom, fear, insecurity, or habit, you begin to take your power back. Loneliness isn't always a signal to add people. Sometimes it's an invitation to meet yourself on a deeper level.
Did you know some of the most creative, influential people in the world chose solitude? Think about Maya Angelou, who wrote in hotel rooms alone for days to access her truth. Or Steve Jobs, who took long, silent walks to think and create. Solitude gave them space to hear their own voice in a world full of noise. Imagine what ideas, clarity, or healing you could find if you stopped running from stillness. Try sitting in a quiet cafe with a journal. Or going to the beach by yourself with no agenda. You don't need a crowd to feel whole. You just need presence, and the courage to be with yourself.
There's a beautiful quote by Osho. Loneliness is the absence of the other. Aloneness is the presence of oneself. Think about that. Loneliness says, I'm missing something. Aloneness says, I have myself. When we shift our mindset, being alone stops feeling like exile and starts feeling like return. One woman I spoke to, Rachel, said she started taking herself on solo dates, dinner, a movie, even weekend getaways. At first, it felt awkward. But then it became liberating. She learned to laugh with herself, to enjoy her own thoughts, to stop waiting for someone to live with her, and start living for herself.
So how do we go from lonely to grounded in solitude? Through rituals. Daily habits that build a relationship with yourself. Start your mornings not with your phone, but with a question, how do I feel today? Light a candle. Make your favorite coffee slowly. Journal, even if it's messy. Meditate, even if it's noisy in your head. These small acts teach your brain something powerful. I matter, even when no one is watching. That's the secret. When you show up for yourself consistently, your inner world stops depending on outside approval. You become your own best company, not out of arrogance, but out of deep self-respect.
Sometimes, our fear of being alone comes from childhood. Maybe you were abandoned, emotionally or physically. Maybe you learned that love had to be earned. Or maybe you were taught that your worth came from how useful, attractive, or entertaining you were. So as an adult, silence can trigger those wounds. That's why healing isn't just about moving on, it's about looking back. Inner child work. Therapy. Speaking kindly to yourself. One listener told me she started placing her hand on her heart every night and whispering, "You're safe with me." Sounds simple, but over time, it rewired the way she related to herself. That's what healing does.
Here's something surprising. Most people make their worst decisions when they're afraid to be alone. Jumping into toxic relationships. Overworking. Scrolling endlessly. But when you embrace solitude, you gain clarity. You make better choices because you're no longer acting from panic. You're acting from peace. One guy, David, left a high-paying job after a silent solo trip to the mountains. He said, "I finally heard what I wanted, not what the world expected." Solitude gave him the answers he'd been too busy to hear. What truth might be waiting for you if you just got quiet enough to listen?
Here's the twist. Learning to be alone actually makes your relationships better. Why? Because you no longer approach love from a place of desperation. You don't need someone to fill your void. You choose someone who matches your fullness. A listener once wrote, "I stopped texting people who made me feel small and started writing letters to myself." That's where real love starts, with wholeness. And when two whole people come together, that's not codependency. That's partnership. That's freedom with connection. Being alone teaches you how to love from a place of strength, not survival.
So wherever you are right now, walking, resting, maybe wiping away a quiet tear, I want you to remember this: you are already enough. You are worthy of your own time, your own care, your own presence. Loneliness will visit, yes. But it doesn't have to move in. With practice, your solitude becomes sacred. Your thoughts become softer. Your soul becomes louder. So take yourself out. Write yourself a letter. Build a home inside your own heart. You are not broken for being alone. You are becoming. And that, my friend, is one of the bravest journeys of all.
Here's the twist. Learning to be alone actually makes your relationships better. Why? Because you no longer approach love from a place of desperation. You don't need someone to fill your void. You choose someone who matches your fullness. A listener once wrote, "I stopped texting people who made me feel small and started writing letters to myself." That's where real love starts, with wholeness. And when two whole people come together, that's not codependency. That's partnership. That's freedom with connection. Being alone teaches you how to love from a place of strength, not survival.
Have you ever noticed how we've confused connection with closeness? We've been taught that being surrounded by people means we're loved, that the more texts we get, the more followers we have, the more seen we are. But real closeness isn't about numbers. It's about depth. I remember a phase in my life when my phone never stopped buzzing, yet I felt more alone than ever. I was constantly in group chats, always saying yes to invites, trying to prove I was included. But none of it touched my heart. I wasn't known. I was visible, but not understood. There's a huge difference between being included and being truly valued. And when you're alone, when there's silence, you finally start to understand the kind of connection you actually crave.
I once sat in a cafe watching a couple sit across from each other for over an hour, both on their phones, barely speaking. That image stuck with me. Two people together, but alone. It reminded me that loneliness isn't solved by presence. It's solved by presence of mind, of heart. You can be in a room full of people and still ache inside. And yet, you can also be in your own company, with no distractions, and feel completely whole. That's what we're talking about today. Learning to stop looking outward for validation, and instead, learning to build intimacy with your own thoughts. Your mind doesn't have to be a prison. It can be a sanctuary, if you let it.
Let me ask you something. Who were you before the world told you who to be? Not the role you play, not the daughter, son, employee, parent, friend, but the real you, underneath it all. When we're constantly surrounded by others, their voices often drown out our own. But when we sit alone, truly alone, we start to hear ourselves again. I remember one quiet evening after a difficult breakup. The house was still, the lights dim. I sat on the floor, surrounded by silence. At first, I was terrified of what I'd feel. But then, a strange peace began to grow. I remembered the version of me that used to draw for hours, who loved music, who danced in front of the mirror without caring. That night, I met myself again, not the broken version, but the forgotten one. And from that moment on, I started building a friendship with her.
It's funny how we lose ourselves by accident. We say we're just growing up, becoming adults, staying busy, but somewhere along the way, we stop checking in with the person we actually are. I had a friend once who used to write poetry in college. Beautiful, raw verses that poured out of him. Then life happened. Job, bills, relationships, and he stopped. When I asked him why, he laughed and said, "Who has time for that anymore?" But what he didn't realize was that the parts of us we abandon in silence often come back as loneliness. The quiet is where the artist returns. where the child within us whispers again. And being alone isn't the enemy, it's the doorway. The doorway to the you that's been waiting patiently to be heard.
There's a powerful difference between being lonely and being in solitude. Loneliness feels empty, like something is missing. Solitude, though, solitude is full. It's a chosen stillness. I remember hiking up a small mountain trail last fall, completely alone. No one with me. No signal. Just the sound of leaves crunching under my boots and birds echoing in the trees. And for once, I didn't wish I had someone to talk to. I just felt present. In that moment, I wasn't missing anything. I was meeting something. Myself. Nature. Peace. That's what solitude can do. It reconnects you not just to the world, but to your place in it.
Yes, and I think especially as women, we're conditioned to fill space, to keep conversations going, to nurture, to entertain. But solitude teaches us to stop performing, to be instead of do. I had a weekend once where I decided not to text anyone. No social plans. Just me. And at first, I felt guilt, like I was being selfish. But slowly, that guilt faded into relief. I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't have to smile when I didn't feel like it. I painted. I wrote in my journal. I took long walks. I didn't feel alone. I felt whole. That's the transformation. When you learn to be alone, you're not avoiding people. You're honoring yourself.
I want to share something deeply personal. Years ago, I went through a period of loss. I lost someone I loved more than words can explain. After the funeral, everyone came around. Friends, food, messages. But then, the days passed. People moved on. And suddenly, I was alone. That's when the real grieving began. At first, the silence was unbearable. But slowly, quietly, it became healing. I'd sit by the window and cry, then laugh at a memory, then cry again. No one was there to tell me to be strong or move on. In that sacred space of aloneness, I met my pain head on. And through that meeting, I began to heal. Sometimes, the deepest healing doesn't happen in support groups or busy distractions. Sometimes it happens in the quietest room, when you let your soul speak.
That touched me deeply. I think we're so afraid of pain that we distract ourselves from it with noise. But healing demands silence. It demands space. I went through depression once, and I kept thinking I had to fight it by staying busy, by seeing people, going out, never letting myself sit still. But when I finally allowed the stillness to come in, I heard something else. Not sadness, but truth. I realized I'd been chasing approval, not purpose. I'd been surviving, not living. In my loneliness, I found honesty. And through honesty, I found healing. If you're listening right now and you're going through something, let me say this. Your healing is not behind another person. It's not waiting in a new job or a new relationship. It's waiting inside you, in the silence you keep running from.
There's a sacred opportunity in solitude, a chance to rebuild your inner world. Think of it like renovating a home. You strip away the noise, the clutter, the opinions of others, and what you're left with is the bare foundation. That's your soul. That's your truth. When you're alone, you can start asking questions. What kind of life do I really want? What values actually matter to me? Who do I become when no one's watching? Alone time lets you redesign your life, piece by piece, not for applause, but for alignment. And that's where strength is born. Not in how many people love you, but in how well you love yourself when no one else is around.
And it's okay if that process takes time. You don't have to figure everything out in a week. Sometimes solitude feels empty at first because you're detoxing from chaos. But keep going. Let yourself be bored. Let yourself cry. Let yourself laugh out loud at a silly memory. Your soul isn't asking for perfection, it's asking for presence. I started creating rituals for myself. Morning walks with no music. Candlelit baths. Journaling every night. Those moments built a relationship with myself. A quiet, loyal friendship. And now, when I'm alone, I don't feel abandoned. I feel accompanied by me.